Hey y'all, I am here to talk about one of my favorite projects to do with students. It's one of their favorite projects to do themselves. One, because it's super personalized, they love doing it, it's interesting, and they can make some money. So this project I'm talking about is entrepreneurship, and it's not just learning about how to start a business or reading about it or interviewing somebody who's started a business. This is students are really getting into the process of not just developing a business, but actually starting it. So I'm going to walk through how I do that with my students step by step by step and show you some examples. And so, yeah, let's get into it. All right, let's start with the benefits. Why do it this way? Why have them actually develop and execute their own businesses, like really launch them? This kind of experience goes way beyond content. So students learn how to do the things, how to take the steps to develop their own business so that they can do that in reality once they're out in the world. They develop an idea, they learn how to conduct market research, they communicate clearly, they manage money and solve real problems. And the biggest thing is that they learn from their own experiences instead of somebody else's. So even if their first idea doesn't work or their business doesn't take off, this happens sometimes, it happens. They now know how to do it. So they've gone through the process, so could do it again if they wanted to. So let's talk about implementation options, some ways to sort of execute this or carry it out in your classroom with your students. There are a couple of different ways you can run this. What I usually do is I start in the spring, around April, so right now, and we spend a few weeks developing businesses, and then students launch and run their own businesses over the summer on their own. That part is separate from me. So my role really ends once everything is set up and ready to go. Another option is to keep the entire experience in class. So where students not only develop their businesses with you, but they also launch and operate them while you're still there to guide them. So this allows for real-time feedback, adjustments, and support as the business is actually running. I don't personally run it this way because my schedule is not set up that way, but it's a great option, especially for entrepreneurship or business classes. There's no one right way to do it. It really depends on your schedule and how involved you want to be during the actual operation phase. It's important to know that, though, no matter how you run it, whether they're launching their businesses with or without you, a big part of this happens outside of class. So students are doing a lot of the building on their own time, and you're using class time to guide and support them. All right, now let's talk about your role. So with that role, guiding and supporting them, you guide, you mentor, you coach, and you facilitate. So compared to a more traditional setup, your role here looks pretty different. During class time, you're not standing up and delivering content all the time. You're helping your students kind of work through each of these steps of developing a business. You're introducing the steps, you're walking the room and offering support and guidance while they work on their business pieces. Let me walk you through what this actually looks like step by step. So the first step that I take with my students is that they brainstorm business ideas. And they base that brainstorming on things like their interests, their strengths, their hobbies, what's relevant in their community, maybe what season it is. And so something like cooking, a student has an interest in cooking, that might turn into take and bake pizzas. I had a student do that on a bike. Event cakes, lunch services. And the goal is to move from a general interest to a specific realistic idea and can be anywhere from low-cost services to more money-intensive products. My students think and talk through these options as they're brainstorming. So if you look at this list, my students, these examples are on here because my students have done every single one of these. So, like photography or videography sort of business might cost less money because it's a service than would say a cookies in a jar business where you need all of the ingredients, you need the jars. With a lawn services, you need a lawnmower or you need rakes or you need tools. So your students will kind of work through those little details and logistics later on. Right now, it's just brainstorming. That's the first step. So they move from broad to specific, like I said. So if they're interested in reading or they love to read, they might branch that out into more specific business ideas like a proofreader or a reading tutor or a reading camp instructor. Maybe they host a summer camp for kids. The next step is research and logistics. They start thinking through things like what businesses already exist and what's their competition. Do they need equipment? Do they need permits? Are they going to need some kind of training? Are there barriers that they might run into? And this is where ideas start to get a little bit more specific and grounded. So with the cookies in a jar example, again, one of the barriers or obstacles is how many ingredients and supplies are needed, and that can be really cost heavy. And then they'll either figure out ways around the supplies issue or they'll shift to some other sort of cooking project or cooking business. So when I said a lot of times they'll work through this, so I've had high school students and my own kids at home have done this cookie in a jar business. And one thing that my high school students did, because they were realizing that mason jars were so expensive. Things like flour and sugar and salt, that kind of stuff was fairly cheap and they could get their money back in profits with that. But mason jars were so expensive. So they kind of problem solved through either how they could get around this or some way to make supplies affordable. So my high school students came up with this awesome idea to create a mason jar buyback program for these cookie in a jar business that they created. So what they offered their buyers is money back if they returned the mason jar to my students after they were done using it. So they could wash and kind of recycle these mason jars. The next step that my students go through after they have kind of refined a business idea or come up with a few that they could potentially dive deeper into is market research. And this is a big one, and I always tell teachers not to skip it. Students create surveys and ask real people if they would actually use or buy their product or service. And then they analyze their results and their data, like what percentage said yes, what feedback did they get, is there a real demand for this product? And they adjust their ideas if needed. Sometimes students do focus groups, but that's optional. I require surveys. All of my students need to do that. I also have had students meet with professionals for tips and advice, which is what is happening in this photo right here. That's a salesperson and a marketing staff member of a startup company in Minneapolis that my students were interviewing and working with to try to get some help with sales and marketing. So this whole step is so important because sometimes the idea they're most excited about, for example, I had a student who wanted to sell snow cones at outdoor ice rinks in Minnesota in January. While a fun play on words, it just isn't something people wanted. And, the student found this out by talking to potential customers. So, a snow cone on a freezing cold day outside isn't what these kids and these parents want that are hanging out at outdoor ice rinks. What they wanted was a fun way to stay warm. So he did the survey. He found from the survey that not only did they prefer warm drinks over snow cones, but it would be fun to have their kids kind of build their own hot chocolates or warm drinks with fun toppings. So this feedback was how this student made their, ordinary hot chocolate stand sort of stand out from the competition. Point is, it's much better to learn whether this product or service is in demand or wanted before your students launch into full operation. The next step is your students will kind of craft a business proposal, which is essentially a summary of their plan, of their business idea. So they put together a basic proposal and they always pitch it to me for approval. If there's time, they might pitch it to the class, or some teachers I know have taken this concept and had their students do kind of a Shark Tank style presentations, which students love. It's a great way to get feedback and make adjustments before launching into full operation. So this photo you see is one of my students kind of came up with a family photography business. And this photo is of her doing a photo shoot for a parent for their child's first birthday. Whether your students pitch it to just you or the class Shark Tank style, I highly, highly recommend them going through some sort of session or process where they can receive feedback and make adjustments before they really dive into their actual business. Because the remaining steps are pretty time intensive. So the next step, now that they have a business idea, they have a proposal, they have a general plan for what they're going to do moving forward, they'll develop operation spreadsheets. This is a system to track their business revenue, their expenses, their profit. Some students put things like to-do lists or supplies lists or personnel. You can have students build their own spreadsheets, but I've found that fiddling around with formatting can take over the experience. This isn't a project about learning how to build and format a spreadsheet. I want them to kind of keep their eye on the prize. So I usually keep this part simple and give them a pre-formatted operations spreadsheet, which you can see from this picture. It's what you're looking at. Step 6 is they write a business plan. This part can look a few different ways depending on your time frame. So some teachers have students create a fully polished professional business plan with a cover page and a table of contents, and that can take some time. If you're on a tighter timeline, you can absolutely simplify this and just have students work through the ideas. So to craft an executive summary or jot down notes, more like a rough draft or a guided outline rather than a formal document. Personally, I wouldn't skip this step entirely. Even if it's not perfectly formatted, this is where students really think through how their business will actually work. It forces them to connect all of the pieces, what they're selling, who it's for, how they'll run it, and how they'll get people to actually use it. And if they do end up asking for support or funding, like from parents, for example, this plan, like in a binder or a digital, professionally written out business plan is going to really come in handy. Step 7 is marketing, which includes, for me and my students, a website. So this part is super essential. Students create a marketing plan within their business plan. And I have my students take an extra marketing step to build a simple website for their businesses. So in this, bulleted list here, what I mean by collabs is in this photo on this slide, some of my students started a skateboard company where they made skate decks and sold them. My students connected with the owners of a local skate park to see if they could host a launch party for their skateboards. And so they basically had a free skate night for kids in the city and sold their skate decks at the same time in collaboration with this already established skateboard company. For the website, my students just use easy drag and drop website makers like they've used Weebly or Google Sites, and some are more sophisticated. Some students are able to dive more deeply into this, but it really just needs to be something basic where their buyers can go and look at their products or look at their services and their prices and what they have to offer and that kind of stuff. I've found marketing is really where students shine, so don't skip this step. These 21st century teens know how to get the word out. If no one knows about their businesses, it doesn't matter how good they are. No one can actually use what's being offered, and that would be unfortunate. Now, sometimes we wrap this up with an entrepreneurship fair. That's what I do to kind of launch and showcase the businesses they've created. Again, this is totally optional, but I like to have my students set up booths, showcase their ideas, and invite parents, peers, and a lot of times community members. And like I said, this isn't required, but it's a really powerful way to bring everything together and give students the opportunity to showcase their services or products. It often gets them business. It's a great networking and marketing opportunity. Like if there's somebody who is doing take and bake pies, they can leave out an order form. And what I've found is that the neighboring community is really supportive of young entrepreneurs. So you really get a lot of eyeballs on your students' businesses if you do something like this, an entrepreneurship fair. So let's talk about the timeline for a second, because this can go a variety of ways depending on your schedule. I've mentioned for me that the way I run this is students are in person with me in the classroom, specifically once a week for about an hour and a half. I introduce a step, students work on it in class with me, and then they finish whatever wasn't finished outside of class. And that's just based on the timeline and schedule I've been given. If you see your students daily, you can move through this much faster or spend more time in class on steps that might need more guidance or attention from you, like writing the business plan. The key is that some of the work has to happen outside of class, no matter your schedule. So for example, when students conduct market research, they need to reach their actual target audience, and that's often not in the classroom. If they only survey their peers at school, but their target customer is a busy parent, the feedback won't mean much. It just won't be accurate. So everything I just walked through is exactly how my students build their businesses. And as you can probably tell, it's a lot more to put together on your own than you'd probably like to do. So from creating a business plan template to formatting the operations spreadsheet, this stuff has taken time. And it's something I've spent quite a bit of time over the years fine-tuning to really work well for my students. And it includes things like templates and guides and tools that they can use to move from idea to launch. It's something students can follow independently and something you can reuse every time you run this experience. So if you want to take a closer look at this resource, I've linked that in the description of this video. This is one of those experiences where students don't just learn something. They leave with something, a real skill set, a real plan, and sometimes even a real business. Most of the time, a real business that I would say 99% of the time, my students have actually launched their businesses. So they leave at a minimum, whether they launch their businesses or not, they leave your class knowing how to do it in case they want to do it in the future, not just talk about it. So if you give this a try, let me know how it goes. I'd really love to learn about some of the businesses your students created, how the whole process went. And yeah, so that's all I have for you today. Subscribe if you love learning experiences like this one, and I will see you in another video, I hope.